I stared at the official-looking letter in my hand, coffee forgotten as my peaceful morning on the cabin's deck was shattered by 3 words. Mandatory property inspection. According to this notice, I had precisely 72 hours to arrange for someone named Catherine Niles, HOA president of Pine Summit Estates, to inspect my non-compliant property modifications, or face daily fines of $100. The only problem? I'd never heard of Pine Summit Estates, had never joined an HOA, and my cabin was deliberately purchased for its isolation on 5 acres of mountainside forest, away from the very concept of homeowners associations. I'm Colin Forrester, retired Army Corps of Engineers, and this mountain cabin represented everything I dreamed about during my 20 years of service. After 4 deployments and enough bridge building in combat zones to last a lifetime, I'd saved every penny for this place. 2,800 square feet of hand-hewn timber, stone fireplace, wraparound deck, and blissful solitude. I'd spent the last 3 years renovating it myself, turning the 1970s hunting cabin into my forever home, complete with solar panels, rainwater collection system, and a workshop where I crafted custom furniture to sell at the valley's weekend markets. The HOA letter claimed my recent shed addition and unauthorized landscaping violated community standards. But there was no community up here. My nearest neighbor was half a mile down the mountain road. Something wasn't adding up. I called the number listed on the letterhead. Pine Summit Estates Homeowners Association, this is Brooke, answered a cheerful voice. Hi, I'm calling about a letter I received demanding a property inspection. This is Colin Forrester at 742 Ridgeline Trail. There was a pause and some keyboard clicking. Oh, Mr. Forrester. Yes, Mrs. Niles has flagged your property for immediate compliance review. She can be available tomorrow at 10 a.m. That's not going to work. I'm not in your HOA. My property isn't part of Pine Summit Estates. Another pause. Sir, according to our records, your address falls within our jurisdiction. The inspection is mandatory. Look, I've owned this place for 5 years. There was never any HOA paperwork when I purchased it. This is private land. I'll have Mrs. Niles call you directly to resolve this misunderstanding, she said with a tone suggesting I was the one confused. Within 15 minutes, my phone rang. The woman on the other end didn't bother with pleasantries. Mr. Forrester, this is Catherine Niles, president of Pine Summit Estates Homeowners Association. I understand you're refusing the mandatory inspection of your property. Her voice carried the practiced authority of someone used to being obeyed. I took a deep breath. Ms. Niles, I think there's been a mistake. My cabin isn't part of any planned community. It's on private acreage outside of any HOA boundaries. That's incorrect, she countered immediately. Our community has expanded its coverage area last year with the Paradise Ridge annexation. Your property falls within the new boundaries. Your shed addition was constructed without approval, and there have been reports of improper landscaping that affects the natural watershed. I felt my blood pressure rising. That's impossible. I would have had to sign documentation agreeing to join your HOA. No such thing ever happened. The previous owner signed the annexation agreement. It transfers with the property, she said smoothly. I'll be there tomorrow at 10 to assess the violations and discuss the necessary remediation. No, you won't, I said firmly. I need to see documentation proving my property is within your jurisdiction before I allow any inspections. The documentation will be provided during the inspection, she replied. Refusal to comply will result in immediate daily fines as outlined in the notice. Good day, Mr. Forrester. She hung up before I could respond. I spent that afternoon poring over my property documents, deed, and county records online. There was absolutely nothing indicating my land was part of any homeowners association. In fact, my property was technically in Granite County, while Pine Summit Estates was entirely within neighboring Pinecrest County. The county line ran along Ridgeline Road, with my driveway clearly on the Granite County side. The next morning, precisely at 10, a shiny black Lexus SUV with PSHOA vanity plates pulled into my gravel driveway. From my workshop window, I watched as Catherine Niles emerged, a woman in her early 50s with immaculately highlighted blonde hair, wearing designer hiking clothes that had clearly never seen a trail. She carried a leather portfolio and was accompanied by a thin man with a tablet who remained a step behind her. I met them on the porch, property maps and deed in hand. "Good morning, Mr. Forrester," she said with a tight smile that didn't reach her eyes. "This is Ryan, our compliance officer. We'll need to see your backyard additions and take measurements. Before we go any further," I said, "I need to see documentation proving my property falls within your HOA's jurisdiction." She sighed dramatically. "We can handle the paperwork after the inspection. This non-compliance issue has been flagged as urgent due to watershed concerns." "No documentation, no inspection," I stated flatly. "My property records clearly show I'm in Granite County, while Pine Summit Estates is entirely in Pinecrest County." A flicker of something, annoyance, worry, crossed her face before she recovered. "The county line is irrelevant to HOA jurisdiction," she said dismissively. "Ryan, show Mr. Forrester the boundary map." Ryan turned his tablet toward me, displaying a colorful map of Pine Summit Estates with a recent-looking extension shaded in yellow that, indeed, seemed to encompass my property and several others along Ridgeline Trail. "This map isn't official," I pointed out. "There's no county stamp, no surveyor certification. It's our internal planning document," she said. "Now, about that inspection, no," I interrupted. "I've checked county records. There's no record of my property being annexed into any HOA. Unless you can provide legal documentation, I'll have to ask you to leave." Her polite veneer cracked. "Mr. Forrester, being difficult will only make this more expensive for you. We have regulations about property appearance, and your rustic additions are affecting property values throughout the ridge." That's when it clicked. The new luxury development. About a mile down the mountain, a developer had been building multi-million-dollar mountain retreat homes, all identical contemporary glass and steel boxes that looked nothing like traditional mountain cabins. I'd heard they were struggling to sell the highest lots because potential buyers could see my traditional cabin from their decks. "This isn't about compliance," I said. "This is about trying to force changes to my property because it doesn't fit with the aesthetic of those new Ridge Point mansions you're trying to sell." Her eyes narrowed. "That's absurd. This is about community standards that you're legally obligated to follow. Prove it. Show me the legal documentation that places my property within your HOA boundaries. I don't have to stand here being interrogated," she snapped. "You have 48 hours to schedule this inspection, or the fines begin. Additionally, we'll place a lien on your property for noncompliance." As she turned to leave, I called after her. "Any attempt to place a fraudulent lien will result in legal action from my end." She paused but didn't turn around before getting into her SUV and driving away, gravel spraying from her tires. I immediately called Mitch Hargrove, an attorney friend from town who specialized in real estate law. "An HOA trying to claim jurisdiction where they have none?" Mitch said after I explained. "That's a new one. Send me everything they've given you so far." 2 days later, I received another letter, this one certified mail, stating that fines were now accruing on my property at $100 per day, and that Pine Summit Estates HOA would be filing a lien if payment wasn't received within 30 days. Mitch advised me to ignore it while he investigated further, so I went about my business, continuing work on a dining table commission for a client in Denver. A week passed, and I nearly forgot about the HOA nonsense until I returned from a supply run to find a small group of people standing at the edge of my property, pointing toward my cabin and taking pictures. I parked and approached them. "Can I help you folks with something?" A woman in the group turned, startled. "Oh, we're just from the architectural committee. Mrs. Niles asked us to document the non-compliant structures." "You're trespassing on private property," I said calmly. "I'm going to have to ask you all to leave immediately. This is an official HOA committee visit," insisted a balding man in a polo shirt. "We have the right to document violations from community property." This isn't community property, I explained. And my land isn't part of your HOA. You're trespassing, and if you don't leave now, I'll call the sheriff. They exchanged uncertain glances before reluctantly retreating to their vehicles parked along the road. That evening, Mitch called with interesting news. I've been digging through records and talking to county officials, he said. Not only is your property definitely not part of Pine Summit Estates, but I've found at least 7 other properties along Ridgeline Trail that have received similar notices despite being in Granite County. So they're just trying to strong-arm people into compliance with an HOA they don't belong to? I asked. It looks that way. But there's more. I found a connection between Pine Summit HOA and Altitude Luxury Developments, the company building those contemporary monstrosities down the ridge. 3 members of the HOA board, including your friend Catherine Niles, are investors in the development. So this is about property values for their investment, I said, pieces falling into place. Exactly. They're trying to control the aesthetics of properties visible from their development. I've seen this before, but usually, they try to buy people out, not fabricate HOA jurisdiction. What's our next move? I asked. I'm filing a cease and desist tomorrow. But I suggest you set up some cameras on your property. Something tells me they're not going to back down easily. I took Mitch's advice, installing wildlife cameras that covered my driveway and the perimeter of my property. They were originally purchased to capture images of the local elk and bear, but would now serve a different purpose. 3 days later, my security measures proved prescient. I was working in town at the farmer's market, selling my latest batch of handcrafted cutting boards, when my phone alerted me to motion at my cabin. I'd opened the app to see Catherine Niles and 2 men I didn't recognize walking around my property, peering in windows and taking measurements of my workshop and shed. I immediately called the sheriff's office to report trespassers, then packed up my market booth and drove the 40 minutes back to my cabin. By the time I arrived, a Granite County sheriff's vehicle was already in my driveway, and Deputy Watson was speaking with a clearly agitated Catherine Niles. Mr. Forrester, Deputy Watson greeted me as I parked. Got here as quick as I could. These folks claim they have legitimate business on your property. They absolutely do not, I said firmly. They're from an HOA in Pinecrest County trying to claim jurisdiction over my property without any legal basis. That's not true, Catherine interjected. We have documentation. May I see this documentation? Deputy Watson asked. She hesitated, then opened her portfolio and handed over the same unofficial map Ryan had shown me on his tablet. Deputy Watson studied it. Ma'am, this isn't an official county document. It has no legal standing. The annexation was filed last year, she insisted. With which county? He asked. Pinecrest County, of course. Then it would have no bearing on properties in Granite County, which Mr. Forrester's clearly is, Watson explained patiently. County records show this property has never been part of any HOA. There must be some mistake in the records, she insisted. No mistake, ma'am. Now, did Mr. Forrester give you permission to be on his property today? We don't need permission for compliance inspections, she said, chin lifting defiantly. You do if you have no legal authority over the property, Watson countered. Mr. Forrester, do you want to press trespassing charges? I considered it for a moment. Not today. But I want it on record that they were warned, and I want them off my property immediately. Deputy Watson nodded and turned to Catherine. You and your associates need to leave now. If you return without Mr. Forrester's explicit permission, you will be arrested for trespassing. Is that clear? Her face flushed with anger, but she nodded stiffly and motioned for her companions to return to their vehicle. As they drove away, Deputy Watson shook his head. We've had issues with that HOA before. They've been getting more aggressive since those fancy new houses started going up. My attorney is filing a cease and desist, I told him. Good move. But keep those cameras running, he advised before departing. I hoped that would be the end of it, but 2 weeks later, I received a notice that Pine Summit Estates HOA had filed a lien against my property for unpaid fines now totaling $2,100. Mitch immediately filed to have the lien removed as fraudulent, and we scheduled a hearing with the county. What we didn't expect was the escalation that came next. I returned home from a morning run to find a construction crew setting up at the edge of my property. A large sign was being erected. Future site of Pine Summit Estates Community Gate. A quick check of my property boundaries confirmed they were attempting to build directly on my land. I approached the foreman, a burly man with a clipboard. "Excuse me, but this is private property. You're setting up on my land." He looked confused. "This is the HOA easement according to our work order. We're installing the new security gate for the community. There is no easement here," I explained, showing him my property map. "This is my land, and I haven't granted permission for any construction." He frowned at the paperwork. "Look, buddy, I just go where they tell me. You'll need to talk to the HOA representative. She's supposed to be here soon to oversee the initial work." I called both Mitch and the sheriff's office, then stood firmly by the property markers, photographing everything. Within 20 minutes, Catherine's Lexus pulled up, and she emerged looking triumphant until she spotted me. "Mr. Forrester, this doesn't concern you," she said dismissively. "We're exercising our easement rights for community infrastructure." "What easement?" I demanded. "There is no easement on my property." She produced a document from her portfolio. "This easement was registered last month. It allows for community access infrastructure." I examined the paper. It was indeed an easement document, appearing official with county stamps, but something seemed off. I took pictures of it with my phone. "This easement document uses my property address, but the parcel number is wrong," I pointed out. "And I never signed this." She snatched the paper back. "The previous owner granted the easement. Now, if you'll excuse us, we have work to begin." Fortunately, Deputy Watson arrived just then, followed shortly by Mitch. After examining the documents and confirming with County Dispatch that the parcel number on the easement belonged to an entirely different property 5 miles away, Deputy Watson ordered the construction crew to pack up and leave. "Mrs. Niles," he said gravely, "that easement document appears to have been altered to include Mr. Forrester's address on an easement for a different property. That could constitute fraud." "That's ridiculous," she sputtered. "It must be a clerical error." Mitch stepped forward. "A clerical error that you were attempting to use to build on my client's property without permission? Along with filing a fraudulent lien and repeatedly trespassing after being warned? Mrs. Niles, we're well beyond cease and desist territory now." Deputy Watson took the easement document as evidence, and asked Catherine to accompany him to the station to answer some questions. Her face had lost its confident expression, replaced by something closer to panic. Over the next few weeks, the situation unraveled completely for Catherine Niles and Pine Summit Estates HOA. Mitch discovered they had attempted similar tactics with 6 other properties along the ridge, all strategically located to be visible from the new luxury development. The fraudulent easement turned out to be just one of several documents that had been altered to create the illusion of HOA authority. The county investigation revealed that Catherine, along with 2 other HOA board members, had invested heavily in altitude luxury developments. They stood to lose substantial amounts if the development didn't sell at premium prices. My cabin and others like it along the ridge were considered eyesores that lowered property values for the contemporary glass homes they were trying to sell. Their plan had been to either force compliance with their aesthetic standards or to make ownership so difficult through fines and restrictions that we would eventually sell, likely to them at below market rates. They had successfully bullied 2 other homeowners before reaching my property. 3 months after that first letter arrived, I sat on my deck watching the sunset paint the mountains gold, finally able to enjoy my solitude again. Catherine Niles was facing charges for fraud, forgery, and attempted real estate theft. Pine Summit Estates had elected an entirely new board that immediately disavowed all actions against properties outside their actual jurisdiction. Altitude luxury developments had been forced to disclose the conflicts of interest to their investors and was now struggling to avoid bankruptcy. As for me, I had a new appreciation for my little slice of mountain paradise, and for the importance of knowing exactly where your property lines lie. The settlement from my countersuit against the HOA would pay for a nice addition to my workshop, and I'd connected with the other targeted homeowners to form a neighborhood watch of sorts. Sometimes I think about Catherine Niles and almost feel sorry for her. Almost. She'd been so certain of her authority, so convinced of her right to control what others did with their own property, that she'd crossed the line into criminal behavior without hesitation. My military career had taught me many things, but perhaps the most valuable lesson was knowing which hills were worth defending. This mountain cabin, my retirement dream, had definitely been one of them. As I sipped my coffee and watched an eagle soar over the valley below, I was grateful I'd stood my ground, legally and literally, against an HOA that had no business on my mountain.